Did you hear that?
Got it.
Okay. Good afternoon. This is September 19th, 2025, at a little after 2 in the afternoon. And my guest today is Kenneth Anderson. Kenneth is a lawyer. He's also an Episcopalian. He lives in Philadelphia. Kenneth will talk about this, but he became an Episcopalian when he went to go to law school at the University of Richmond. And he went to the Black Episcopal Church of his forebears, St. Philip's, on Haynes Avenue in Richmond. And Kenneth has written a wonderful history of St. Philip's. And we're here today to talk about that, but also to talk about, Kenneth, if you don't mind, your own spiritual journey and what being a Black Episcopalian means to you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're going to proceed. Do you have any questions?
That sounds great. Looking forward to it.
All right, I'll just start asking you questions.
Sounds good.
Okay. What is your profession now?
So I actually work in government relations for a natural gas company in Philadelphia, but like you said, non-practicing attorney.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And how long have you been there?
I started there 2 years ago. So after law school, I actually worked on various political campaigns. I worked for Episcopal Community Services for about 2 years, in between different political campaigns. So I've done national, state, and local races. And then I moved into the government affairs space following actually Philadelphia's mayoral race in 2023.
I see. And have you lived in Philadelphia all of your life?
I'm from right outside of the city. So grew up in Montgomery County, which is, I guess, northwest of Philadelphia. And then went away for college.
What's the town?
So Upper Dublin Township.
Uh-huh.
Was born at Abington Hospital and, grew up about 5 minutes from where I was born and lived in the same house my whole
Upper
childhood.
Darby, you say?
Upper Dublin, so the other side of the river.
Oh,
So
Upper Darby.
Upper Darby is Delaware County.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you go to undergraduate school?
So I also attended the University of Richmond for my undergrad studies as well.
And while you were in secondary school, I gather, was Germantown Academy?
It was, correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And actually, recently, it's funny, since I've last seen you, I now serve as the archivist for Germantown Academy. Funny enough.
Oh, how wonderful!
So I get to do that in my spare time, which is nice.
What now? Why did you go to Germantown Academy as opposed to Philadelphia has these fabulous schools, all of them are fabulous, including Germantown Academy. What made you choose Germantown?
So I'll be honest, my parents picked it for me. So I actually went to, I started in Catholic school, and I think I realized maybe I was an Episcopalian even at 5, even though I was raised Baptist, because I questioned some practices of the Catholic Church, such that a nun called my mother in first grade, and needless to say, I was put in public school for the rest of my grade school. So I attended Upper Dublin public schools between 2nd and 5th grade, and then transferred to Germantown Academy in 6th grade. My parents selected it for me, I think mostly just for the academic rigor. So I had no say in the matter, but it was one of the best decisions they ever made.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you were growing up, what was your church home? What
So
was your spiritual life
was a
in
member
the
of
family?
Mm-hmm. So actually, my parents met at church. So church has always been a very important part of the Anderson family, and then my mother is a Scot, so the Scots, they're all church-going people. So I was raised as a Baptist. So my parents met at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Germantown, where my mother's father was reared, and his parents were members as well. My great-grandmother's name is still in a pew at that church. And ironically, my family are not members there anymore. But also on my grandmother's side, so my maternal grandmother is an Episcopalian and actually attended St. Philip's as a child in Richmond. So there was always this discussion of the Episcopal Church in the background. But I grew up and was dunked, baptized and dunked, and it really had a sort of a traditional Black Baptist upbringing, with all of the politics from the pulpit, and the ushers wearing white and the whole deacons on the front row, and etc. So got a really good foundation of church in that way. I think that I'm one of those people who can't really pinpoint like when they started to have faith, but have had a pretty strong relationship with God from, I guess, the probably since 5 or 6. And it's been great to see him work in my life, that kind of thing. So
When you say you had a relationship with God, what do you mean?
so I was definitely a practicing Christian from the start. So there was never an opportunity, I think, for me to even go a different way, just because it was so drilled into me in all of the best ways. So when I hear about folks who grow up in religion and honestly, specifically in Christian households, and then end up rejecting God and their faith in Jesus by I guess they're my age. It always troubles me, just because I feel like my parents did the perfect amount of rearing a child in the way you should go, without shoving it down my throat.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very easy to take to the teaching of Christ, but also to the structure of church. So I'm grateful I managed to get both, and both my siblings also. I have a sister and a brother. All three of us are sort of different flavors of. We all believe the same thing at the core of Christ as Lord, but we all worship very differently. So it's an interesting thing where two traditional Black Baptists raised three kids, one who's an Episcopalian, one who's non-denominational, and one who's very much like they are. So it's a funny it's funny how that works.
Do you have a prayer life?
I do. So I try to pray every morning and every night specifically, but in the midst of my day, I'm often, saying little prayers. So I live in Center City, Philadelphia. I'm often walking by folks who are going through things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm walking by, it's a simple Lord help them, right? And really meaning it. Or if you hear about somebody who is sick, or their parents died or something like that, I throw those special prayers. Um, Honestly, even there are those moments where, so I play a lot of squash. I play golf. If I have a good drive, I'm sometimes going to say to myself, or say to God quietly, "Thank you, God, for a good drive." So I find that it is. I don't think that there are coincidences in this life, and I think that God does even control the little things that we don't even think that He thinks about.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to acknowledge, and I love that about my life too, where when something good or something happens that's consequential, it's like I know that there's a bigger plan. It's not just me. So
You're in Center City.
I am.
Have you ever eaten at Rittenhouse Grill?
The Rittenhouse Grill. I have not been there recently.
17th and Locust.
I was there. I'm actually, oddly enough, I'm taking this interview from 16th and Locust. So the last time I was there was 2 years ago in the Warwick Hotel, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest to you that you go back.
Okay.
And you ask for Garth Weldon.
Garth Weldon. Okay.
And you say to Garth Weldon, "I know Riley Temple."
Okay. Garth Weldon.
Garth and I are very good friends. He for many years,
Mm-hmm.
over 40 years now, and very much a part of my life and my family, and among my family and friends.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And so I think he will treat you well.
Okay. Thank you. I know that, not to talk about it on a church interview, but I know that they make an excellent gin martini.
Well, we're Episcopalians.
Well, that's true, right? Exactly.
Sometimes referred to as whiskey Palians.
That is true, right? Great
Now,
martini and a great steak. So
now, where are you churched now? Where do you attend church now?
So I attended St. Mark's Episcopal Church
Uh-huh.
in Center City, given that it is so close to my house.
Sean Mullen.
Exactly. Formerly, he's no longer there, but so I'll attend there on a semi-weekly basis. And admittedly, and I'm ashamed to say this, but I have not found sort of the permanent church home, just because I figured I probably won't live in Center City in the near future. So probably will affiliate with either St. Thomas on Lancaster Avenue, or St. Luke's in Germantown. Those are the two that are most likely where I will end up. because of connections and cultural connections and um, you know relatively strong community programs, that sort of thing.
Now, University of Richmond is a very fine school.
Mhm.
It wasn't. I could never have gone there because I wanted to go away from home, and I needed to be away from Richmond.
I get it. Yeah.
Richmond can be stifling, I found,
Hmm.
particularly if you grew up there.
Hmm.
Why did you go to the University of Richmond?
Great question. Um, so it had nothing to do with
Your Wi-Fi is causing you to halt in speech.
um, basically my college counselor and folks from my high school who were throughout. Can you hear me now?
I can, but yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Any better?
You were frozen for a second.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to? I can start over if you'd like.
Oh, go right ahead. No.
Oh, okay. So there were 14 students at the University of Richmond when I got there. And my college counselor said, you should check out the University of Richmond. So my parents and I went down with my sister, who's less than a year younger, and we toured the campus. And it was pouring rain. And I decided, as soon as I got on campus, I was like, I love this place.
Oh,
I don't know why I love this place, but it's beautiful and it's pouring rain. My mom would not get out of the car, and my dad and I walked around in the rain and then got back in. And I was like, I think I want to apply here. So there was something about it that just like clicked. And then I ended up staying for 7 years. So
what?
That's basic. And then
Go ahead.
oh, just that I applied early decision, and it is the only school technically that I've ever actually applied to and gotten in. So.
And did you go right from undergraduate to law school?
I did. So I spent a summer on Capitol Hill in between. But other than that, yes.
What kind of work did you do on Capitol Hill?
So I was an intern for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And actually, I was placed in the office of the caucus's lone Republican. And full disclosure, I worked on the Biden campaign in 2020. I was very surprised to work in the office of Mia Love, the late Mia Love of recent, unfortunately, who was a conservative Black Mormon from Utah and had nothing to do with me or anything about me. And yet I had a really good experience in her office.
Yeah.
So
now, some of us who go right from undergraduate to law school believe that it was not a good idea, not the best idea, that you might have profited from taking some time off between and doing something else between undergraduate and law school. How do you feel about that?
I think I'm glad I went straight through looking back. So I just turned 30 2 months ago. And I was glad that I graduated as young as I did because I had so much time to sort of figure out what I eventually wanted to do. And I think I'm still figuring that out as it goes.
Welcome.
But I do think, right. But I do think that I could tell the difference looking back. You can tell the difference of the people who work as paralegals for 2 years in civil procedure is a heck of a lot easier for them than it is for the person who's just come out of college. I didn't have any issue with time management, and I treated law school as a job, so it was our association of things. And I'm glad that I went straight through, but I understand that it's not for everybody. I see both sides.
When did you, upon going to the University of Richmond, you had a knowledge through your grandmother of St. Philip's?
Correct.
Had you ever attended there prior to the first time that you went?
I never did, no. So as a child, it was talked about by both my grandmother and my great-grandfather, who also was born in Richmond and was confirmed at St. Philip's, and his parents had joined and all that. But no, I'd never actually visited until my sophomore year of college. So I didn't go home for Easter, and me and a random friend, I don't know why she said, "Oh, I'll go with you to church." But we ended up going to St. Philip's on Easter morning for their 10:30 service, and immediately I was hooked. I was just like, "Wow, this place is wonderful." not only is my family roots here, but also it was a good service. The people were among the most friendly people I'd met. And honestly, too, just as an African American, it was nice coming from the campus of the University of Richmond and then going to a Black religious space that I felt used to it. Even though I grew up Baptist, I was used to the service and the type of community that only a Black church gives. So that immediately, fit like a glove. It was very easy to return.
Historic Black church.
Exactly right. Mm-hmm.
And was Phoebe Roth the rector at the time?
She was. Mm-hmm. So Bishop Phoebe now. I remember after the service, I actually walked out, and she'd greet everybody as they'd walk out of Mass every Sunday. And I remember saying to her, I'm a student at the University of Richmond, and I'm studying X, Y, and Z, and also my family used to attend here. And she was automatically excited about that, introduced me to 2 or 3 other people. I immediately started to make, friends even before I was a member. So that was nice.
And she, your book says that she put you in touch with Ruth Little.
She did. I miss her dearly. I really do. So actually, I guess within the first time that I visited was just for a service. And then I visited a second time later. I guess it would have been the next winter. I think that's right. So I went to Mass, and then afterwards I had been awarded a grant to work on my family's history in Richmond. So I was thinking, okay, St. Philip's is a key part of that history. Let's go visit again. And I didn't even have necessarily the intention of joining the church. I was like, okay, let's go and see what this is like. So went back. I mentioned to Mother Phoebe. I said, I've been here before. And she said, yes, I remember you the first time you came. You need to talk to Ruth Little. Now, because it was snowing outside, Miss Little had not gone to church that day. So another longtime member of St. Philip's, Myrtle Armstrong, she said, Miss Myrtle will know the answer, and she's going to call Miss Ruth for you. So I walk up to Miss Myrtle, and we become acquainted. And she calls Miss Ruth, and she goes, "Hi, Ruth, dear, how are you? I know you didn't come out because of the rain, but listen, or the snow. But I have this young man here, and he says his family used to go here." And I can kind of hear her speaking through the phone as Miss Myrtle's talking on her phone. And she goes, "Oh, well, then what's the young man's last name?" She said, "What's your last name?" I said, "I'm an Anderson, but my mother's people are Scots. They attended here from the 1890s to the 1950s. She said, "Okay, Scott." She said, "Name some first names." So I start giving a few of the names. And she said, "Oh, yes, the Scots, of course. They lived on North 7th Street and North 8th Street in Navy Hill. They belonged here." And so from that moment, my face lights up. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this little old lady who I've never met knows all this history that I didn't know. So I was like, I need to talk to her. So Miss Myrtle says, "Well, listen, she's not here this week, but she's here every week. Come next week and you can talk to her after service." So the next week I go to Mass, and now I'm sitting in the parish hall, which is now named in her honor, which is nice. It's the perfect name for that space. And Miss Ruth and I had coffee, and she brought some artifacts from, it was the 1961 centennial program for the church that had a few relatives in it and just a few newspaper clippings. And so then she tells me after.
Is that the one that had the dark red?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So she brought the red one from the 1950s and then the black one from the 1960s, and shows me all of them and points out people, and she points out herself and I'm just in my world. I'm thinking, wow, this is so exciting. So she says, "Of course, I knew your great-grandfather, Brutsy," and his nickname was Brutsy. His name was Robert Scott, but he went by Brutsy. And she said, "I knew him," and she said, "He moved to Philadelphia, and then he remarried, didn't he?" And, started naming all these family things. I was like, okay, this lady really knows this. I've never heard her name before, but she knows, some dirt under the fingernails for my family, So I had to smile at that. And from there, we just became good friends, and I kept coming back every Sunday. I sat on the left side of the nave, and she sat on the right side. And as I would walk out to go to coffee hour or to go back to study or whatever it was, I'd always have to go and, you give Miss Ruth her hug, and, she'd talk to you for a little, and we'd talk, and she'd say, "Are you staying for coffee?" But every time that she would say goodbye, she'd say, "God be with you." And then, and I'd walk out. So I do miss seeing her on a regular basis, and did get a chance to at least talk to her during the early months of COVID before she passed away. So,
You know,
sorry, that was the long version of that story.
when St. Philip's called Phoebe Rowe, I'd known Phoebe. She and I were in seminary together.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
That's not true. She graduated from seminary way before me, not way, but before me. And of course, she was always around, and I knew her. And when she went to St. Philip's, of course, I schooled her, and then I said to several of my friends at St. Philip's, Archie White, Larry Clark, Sherry Gardner, Garrett Dyson Gardner. I was in her wedding.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And others, most of whom have gone on to glory now. But in any event, I said, Phoebe's going to be a bishop one day. And they said, yeah, right.
Huh. Good call.
She had it. She had that aura. She's very active at Virginia Seminary, or was. She was vice chair of the board here at Virginia Seminary. Had you started writing at the time, or had you already published your Germantown Academy history?
I had. So the first book that I wrote was, I was part of a program called the Academy Scholars at GA.
Yeah.
And it's basically a program where a student could decide to do an independent research project. And I jumped in because I'd already been working in the school archives, just helping the archivist here and there. And I said, there hasn't been a history written about GA since 1936. And, you figure it's a majority white school. I said the first Black student graduated in 1968. There's no mention of him in any of our printed histories. There's no mention of women really at GA because the first class of girls also graduated in 1968. And I said, we need to update this history. So what ended up happening was it's more of a photographic history.
Yeah.
I took hundreds of photos from the archives, wrote captions under them, sort of like the Images of America series, and produced a book and interviewed probably 25 former teachers and current teachers and alums, and just had a blast doing it. And I realized at that point I love writing, and I love telling histories of institutions. So again, it was very easy for me to realize when I got to St. Philip's and got involved. I'm going to write a book on the history because it's never been written, and we have so much to share. And there's so many people who didn't have their histories told. I thought it was time to update things. So.
And I'm sure that Mother Phoebe reacted well. Did the other members of the congregation that you had come to know react well to your project?
Oh, they were thrilled.
Yeah.
A lot of them said, I'm so glad that you're taking the time to do this. Thank you. Yeah. They were very appreciative. I don't think I got any negative feedback and didn't get any pushback either, honestly. Because I also presented it, and I think I was on the vestry by that point, when I started writing, and I sort of just told everybody, I think I'm going to do this. And because I knew that the 160th anniversary was coming up, and then of course the pandemic happened. So I was like, okay, we're doing some planning for this already. And I'm sorry, even before that, Mother Phoebe became Bishop Phoebe, and then the pandemic hit. So it's a very eventful time. And then when I met Reverend Marlene Forrest, it was a perfect transition where she was very supportive of it, and I was honestly helping her learn about the congregation as I was researching. So she had a much better understanding of the history coming in, and it was something that, again, only God could make as perfect as He did. So it was a perfect transition.
By the way, before I forget, I wanted to let you know that Julia Randall sends her regards.
Oh, she's the best. Please send her my best back.
I will. Julia Randall was the archivist at the Virginia Seminary when I was a student there. I was a part-time student because I was still practicing law at the time, and I just went to take courses. I was just curious, and she and I would spend time talking about the church.
Hmm.
And she always had interesting things to show me.
Mm-hmm.
And during the pandemic, I got a call from the archivist at the time, Chris Pote,
Okay.
who said to me, we have a part-time job available for someone who can expand the collection of the African American Episcopal Historical Collection.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, the job description is written for you. He said, are you interested? I said, well, of course I'm interested. And so that's what I've been doing.
Oh, very cool. Okay.
2021, I think it is. Now, with whom did you first confer? I mean, you mentioned Brad and Liz Hayes Mackey.
Mm-hmm.
With whom did you first confer when you sat down to begin your research, or as you were sitting down, or as you were anticipating sitting down to start your research?
Trying to think who my first interview was. It was with, it might have honestly been, I guess, informally with Miss Ruth. But let me think about it. Actually, I'm actually going to look. I brought a copy of my book with me. Let me check the acknowledgments, and I'll be able to tell you exactly who it is. Let's see.
I have it here too.
Oh, I think I know who it was. It must have been Miss Elsie Fields, I believe. I think she was the first interview.
Okay.
I think I wrote these in the order that I interviewed them, I believe. But so Elsie Fields is a longtime member.
First, there, Frances Teal Hayes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then Sharon.
Yeah, Mrs. Hayes was one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't remember who exactly was the first, but I do know that I think it was Miss Elsie. I think. So, and she's the granddaughter of one of the very, very early members of the parish, like as early as the late 1870s. Charles Campbell is her grandfather, who was one of the early treasurers of the parish, and she actually has in her possession, which is I never actually got to see the letters, but she has letters between her grandfather and Father Thomas Kane, who was one of St. Philip's first Black rectors. So, which is incredible that she still has them.
Occasionally, I have a reason to think about or to refer to St. Edmund's in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
St. Edmund's was the church to which Father Raymond Mitchell was called when he left St. Philip's. And I gather from reading your book that you and I would probably agree that Raymond Mitchell's tenure at St. Philip's was defining in so many ways.
Indeed, for sure.
Tell me about that.
So he comes in a really interesting part of, I guess, American religious history. Mm-hmm. So he's overseeing almost the entirety of the 1960s, where church attendance, no matter if you're Black, white, Episcopalian, or Pentecostal, is declining. And the interviews that I got from people who lived during that period, specifically Miss Sherrod and Miss Artiel, and folks who grew up as sort of young people in that era, they all talk about how wonderful Father Mitchell was, despite the fact that he was still a man of their parents' generation. He was still a man who appreciated high church worship. I mean, he wore a beretta often. Did I say that word? I think I said that word right. But he was fully dressed in sort of the vestments of the high church, and yet still St. Philip's was the place to go for dances for everybody on North Side back in the 50s and 60s. So, but also I think too that he inhabited just this era of incredible and quick change. So, by the time that he started and ended his tenure at St. Philip's, hair was longer, politics were more radical. Black power was a thing. Dr. King was not even alive, honestly. So there's a he I think set the standard for the next 50 years that St. Philip's was going to be unapologetically Black, but also still very much high church. And I think that lasted up until, from what I can understand, just in listening to interviews and even my own experience, probably the beginning of now Bishop Phoebe's tenure at St. Philip's. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I also think that Raymond Mitchell was a grand man in carriage, in speech, and his liturgical knowledge was very, very fine. And he employed it in the services. And the people in St. Philip's, who by that time, as you rightly point out, was chock full of movers and shakers in Richmond, both socially, professionally, and in every other way.
Sure.
And financially. And Raymond Mitchell was proud of that, and they were proud of him. So it was a good fit all around. Did you discover that?
I did. And actually, even from folks who were later critical of the parish, they all said nice things about Father Mitchell. So I did have it was a real honor to be able to get this opportunity. So in law school, I worked for, and this is a quick story to explain where I'm going, but in law school, I worked as an extern in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office for a semester and became acquainted with Colette McKeechan, who I reached out to. I was like, oh, I have her email. I know that her husband, Congressman McKeechan, was an acolyte at St. Philip's, that his grandfather was Father Hamilton, who was, again, one of the huge giants of sort of St. Philip's history.
Right.
And so I reached out to Commonwealth Attorney McKeechan, and she had connected me with the congressman. And actually, right before he passed, we probably had a 2.5-hour conversation about St. Philip's, which was wonderful. And Congressman McKeechan mentioned, he said, by the early 70s, I went to college and I got out of there, and I was not, or mid 70s, I guess it was. He said, I was not into Episcopal worship, despite the fact that my parents were incredibly involved. But he said, but I loved Father Mitchell, and I was an acolyte under him, and he confirmed me. And, he said his successor I had issues with, but I really liked him, despite the fact that, again, the times were a-changing, if you will. So it reflects, and I think he also had warm words to say about St. Philip's as a community, even though he did end up a Baptist. But
did you get the sense that Father Mitchell was a tough act to follow?
I think so. And I think I found that throughout the history of St. Philip's, where there are folks who make such an impact, and then typically the next two rectors are sort of short-lived, and some of them actually contributed a great deal, but don't get the credit maybe even that they deserve. So even right before Father Mitchell, his predecessor famously was, when I asked parishioners about, and I'm even blanking on his name, which is terrible. But so, and I can correct that in the transcript. But the immediate rector before Raymond Mitchell was only at the parish for, I think, 3 or 4 years. He was instrumental in ensuring that the parish financially supported the civil rights movement, but nobody ever talked about it. So if you read the vestry minutes from 1956, 57, St. Philip's was part of the parishes that were bailing out Episcopal priests who got arrested in Mississippi and Alabama, and well before even Selma and those sorts of events. But he never gets the credit for it because, again, Raymond Mitchell followed him. So,
well, during that time, that was a bold and controversial thing to do, which is to get people out of jail who had been arrested for being in the civil rights movement.
Sure.
And I can honestly say that not many, you can't turn and think of many people at St. Philip's who were in the middle of the civil rights movement unless they were there professionally. And by that, I mean
Exactly.
people like Spotswood Robinson.
Absolutely. I was so excited, honestly, as a law student in Richmond specifically, to learn that I attended the same church as Spotswood Robinson. So, and I did not know that when I first joined St. Philip's. I knew who he was, but didn't know his whole history. And I find him just a fascinating person, and sort of indicative of what I just said, where you've got the great Thurgood Marshall, but there's no, you don't have the complete history of Brown without Spotswood Robinson. So,
That is correct.
and just the fact that and his life as sort of this elite African American in Richmond as early as the 20s, because his parents, had money and had social connections, all that, and just his ascent into, while still, fighting for his people, it's such a great story that, again, we don't talk about enough. We really should say, we are the Church of Spotswood Robinson and name a few others. And we don't typically do that, which is interesting.
I went to Armstrong High School.
Mm-hmm. My great grandparents met there.
And right. And in its day, it was a very fine school.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget when the high school principal came on the PA system, as he did routinely, when one of the Armstrong alums had done something important, which was all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And for Spotswood Robinson, he got on and he said, "Sons and daughters of Armstrong, rich is your heritage." Spotswood W. Robinson, a graduate of whatever class it was, and he said, he has just been nominated by the President of the United States to be a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. When I say to people what I do, which is to chronicle the history of Blacks in the Episcopal Church, the immediate response is, "What, all three of you?" And I said, "Well, no. Well, granted, we're not as plentiful as we would be in the AME or Baptist churches." I said, "Let me just say this." I said, "We punch above our weight. Thank you very much."
I'll say,
yeah,
absolutely. I mean, if you go through the list of any notable African American especially of that middle century period, Episcopalian. I mean, Thurgood Marshall, Episcopalian, especially like you said, sort of professional folks. All of them attended St. Philip's Richmond, St. Philip's Harlem, St. Philip's Brooklyn, a lot of
St. Edmunds.
St. Edmunds, Chicago, right? Exactly.
You know,
St. Thomas, Philadelphia. Yeah.
My St. Philip's and other churches like it, I think was attractive to a certain social, financial, and economic class of Americans because it is so literate. The liturgy is literate.
I agree.
One of my good friends, I worked in the U.S. Senate for the Senate Commerce Committee for quite some time.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And telecommunications. And one of the people I got to know was Thurgood Marshall Jr., who at that time we called him Goody.
Okay.
But once his father died, he became Thurgood.
Huh.
And I said to him when I took his oral history, and you should go and take a look at it, I said,
I'd love to.
"I have a picture of your father. And he's getting a medal from the rector and the wardens of St. Philip's in Harlem."
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Oh,
I've seen that.
Picture.
I've seen that. Yeah, I was going to say, I've seen that photograph.
And I said, "Why do you like it?" And he said, "Well, it shows my dad in a humble posture." He said, "I didn't see that very often."
That's great. That is great. Is that Hutchins Chew? Is he the rector from?
I don't recall
I'm
it.
forgetting the name of the.
Yeah. But it is. I mean, we do punch above our weight. Now, there's another story about Spotswood Robinson. Does the name Pauli Murray mean anything to you?
I have a painting of her in my house that I did actually. So I paint portraits on the side, and she's the last person that I painted, so which was 2 years ago. I've not picked up a brush in 2 years, but I have an oil painting of her literally as you walk down my stairs. Funny enough.
Do you know her connection to Spotswood Robinson?
I know that they worked together, I guess, at the very beginning, or right before she started with what, Paul Weiss, I believe. I think they worked together in the early 50s, right? Or late 40s.
He taught her.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
She was
Huh.
in the class of 1944
Okay.
at the Howard Law School. Spotswood Robinson taught constitutional law.
Okay.
He himself had been the top academic performer, valedictorian of his class at Howard Law School.
Hmm.
Paulie was the only woman in the class.
Hmm.
And they were having a discussion about how to dismantle Plessy versus Ferguson.
Hmm.
And of course, as you know, it would be 10 years before that particular case, which is Brown and others,
Right.
reached the Supreme Court. So Paulie raised her hand in class and said, well, the argument I would use is that separate could never be equal. Because separate, it's separate. The men in the class laughed at her.
Oh, wow.
Spotswood Robinson took the argument, put it in his pocket, and used it in the brief,
How about that?
and
Huh.
credited her with having articulated the first argument that separate could never be
Huh.
equal.
Oh, wow. Okay. I know
Um,
that they always say that she wrote almost the Bible on civil, or I guess it was the Bible on civil rights litigation before. Is that correct? I think I've heard that phrase before. I'm forgetting the name of the book, but
and she did such groundbreaking research into gender discrimination in the Constitution
mhm.
that when Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote the brief to argue the case before the Supreme Court, she so heavily relied upon Paulie's research and writing that she put her name on the brief.
Wow,
Right.
she's an
So,
incredible person, truly.
a remarkable woman, remarkable, and a
Mhm.
proud Episcopalian, as you know.
Indeed. Hmm. One of the or not one of the Philadelphia 11, but shortly after them, I guess.
Shortly after
So,
that, she's the first
mhm.
Black woman
Right, exactly.
to be ordained. Um, so, how do you regard your life now in the Episcopal Church, given that you have done so much work in uncovering its complex and rich history?
I find that I guess it's I think when you love history like I do, and you like writing histories, and you specifically love writing at a level where you're looking into very minute, in certain people's eyes, details. I think that like it's one of those things where the work will never actually end, which is great. I'm excited that I will probably, God willing, after a long, long and fruitful life, that I will meet Jesus before I finish answering all of the questions that I have in my head about specific aspects of specifically Black Episcopal history. Just because I find that it pops up in areas of my life where I don't even think about it, and then I'm thinking, oh, this could be another idea for a book or an article, or telling somebody randomly on the street or at a dinner party, this information. And it is one of my favorite things, sort of like we were just talking about Spotswood Robinson and Pauli Murray, finding all of these, and honestly, Phoebe Roaf as well, finding all of these Black lawyers who are also Episcopalians. It just seems that we're attracted as a demographic to the church. Um, I find that it's always exciting when I find out somebody was also an Episcopalian when I'm reading a biography, and especially if they're Black. So that's always been exciting.
Does the
But I
name
definitely
W.
want to keep
Ferguson Reed mean anything to you? Fergie Reed?
it. So Fergie Reed, I believe, there's a connection that he has to my own family, and I can't remember what it is. But yes.
He started the Crusade for Voters.
Hmm. I know he was on I think he was on our vestry, and then ran for what, the delegate, or he was one of the first Black delegates, He might
House
have
of
been the
Delegates.
first.
No,
Right.
no, well, that could be, but yeah, he was a member of the House of Delegates.
Mm-hmm.
He's still with us, over 100 years old.
Wow, that's great.
And I've been trying to get his oral history, but he's got a gatekeeper, and I can't
Oh,
get
okay.
beyond her.
Gotcha.
But he was also a member of St. Philip's,
Right. Mm-hmm.
and grew up in the house next door to the Maggie Walker house,
Oh, okay, great.
Jackson Ward.
Mm-hmm.
So he was to the manor born.
Right, exactly.
What? How would you describe the life of St. Philip's in terms of its ascent, its operation, existence at the heights,
Mm-hmm.
and a position that it could not maintain always,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's decline.
I think it mirrors both the Black experience in America, and I think it also mirrors just religious participation in the United States. So,
Talk to me. What do you mean?
Founded during the Civil War, you figure. So the parish one of the most interesting details that I found in doing the early history of the parish, and this is looking through diocesan reports and newspaper articles in the 1860s to the early 1870s. The fact that St. Philip's had a congregation when Richmond was basically not in any shape, it had just been set on fire by the Confederate government, and but still St. Philip's is thriving. You're looking at the early 1870s, where not only is the nation in depression, but also horrible racism, reconstructions going on. And again, at the same time, these Black folks are getting up, they're building an institution almost on their own. So they are getting help from the diocese, and yet at the same time, they're doing a lot of the work on their own. They started a school that is more popular than even the parish, and you have Baptists and Presbyterians and I guess not Pentecostals at that point, but AME folks, Methodists coming in to learn at the Episcopal school, to just build up sort of the Black community in Richmond. So it really served as a core institution, I think, in those early years, and it was a good use of all of the blessings of sort of the elite status of some of the members, where they were able to put those resources to good use for the common good. And so that was great. And then you look again into like the late, I guess from like the 1890s to maybe the 1940s, I'll say. I think it was sort of
Can you hold it right there? I've got to make I've got to leave you for just a couple of minutes.
No problem.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Sounds good.
Sorry, I'm back.
All good.
Thank you. Yes, and the old Richmond families like the Clays, and of course, once Reuben Clay became senior warden, he was senior warden for life, it seems.
Exactly right. It is funny that if you look at I guess it's from 1930, or I'm sorry, even before then, 1919, or I'm forgetting the year that Dr. Hughes started, but William H. Hughes was the senior warden for almost 30 years. And then Reuben Clay was also the senior warden for almost 20 years. And you had 50 years of two men controlling sort of the outlook of the parish, and two incredible people too for their era. But and I did have a chance to talk actually with Dr. Hughes's granddaughter, who lives in Boston, works for WHYY up there, and is she's an academic, I think, in her own right. But you know, his life is just, both of their lives, it's just fascinating. And Reuben Clay's work with the city of Richmond and, you know, the Commonwealth of Virginia in civil rights work is outstanding. But yet also
actually WHYY is Philadelphia.
I'm sorry, not WHYY, WGBH. That's Boston. Sorry. I meant PBS, but thank you. So, you know, even looking at Reuben Clay through the lens of his public face, then hearing stories about him from St. Philip's folks, where, you know, he was a man who did not take any mess, and typical of, like, you know, you said his heritage and his class. And so I think it was Miss Sherrod that told me, I don't think she'd mind me telling this, but she told me a story. She said, you know, there was one time when a man, and maybe you were in service that week, but
I know the story. Go ahead.
Walks into the nave of the church, and he wasn't properly dressed, and I think he clapped just a little too loud, and Clay walks up to him and taps him on the shoulder and says, "You can't do sense of order and you know, and a very clear, you know, politics of respectability in the church sort of behavior."
Well, he put him out.
Right, and exactly.
He walked him out.
Mm-hmm.
Father Mitchell, watching this, walked from the altar down the center aisle of the nave,
really,
out onto the sidewalk, and brought the man back in and put him on the front row.
Wow.
You don't put anybody out of God's church.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed. Yeah.
Right.
So, but again, just even the fact that story exists is just sort of amazing in the worst way, but amazing. And then also looking through vestry minutes from that same period, where, you know, there was a complaint about the use of spirituals during one of the weeks, which I'm thinking, aren't we all African American? You know, we all lest our feet stray from the places our God where we met thee, right? So there were those moments. And then the other one, you know, there was somebody else who complained in the late 50s during allergy season, the fact that the Easter lilies and the incense bothered them. And, you know, Mr. Clay and the rest of the folks on the vestry said, so it's like, we're a high church parish. We have Easter lilies and we have incense. If you don't like it, you can go down the street, you know? So there's,
you know, there is that old story when someone like the one you just told, you recall for me, was being particularly exclamatory. Not someone a member of the church, but a visitor. And, you know, amen, amen, brother, amen, preach the word, preach the word. Somebody walked up to him and said, "Sir, you're disturbing the other parishioners." And he said, "Well, you don't understand. I have the Holy Spirit." And the person, "Well, you didn't get it in here."
That's funny. My grandmother tells a similar story where her grandmother, who was born in 1876 and was a faithful St. Philip's member, she lived on North 7th Street, but would walk to the Lee Street Church all those years. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother said they were walking, you know, I guess toward St. Philip's, and they passed a Baptist church. And she said to my grandmother, she said, "Jeannie, those Baptists make too much noise. God can hear them." She said, "God can hear them even if they're not yelling. They make way too much noise." She hated Baptists. And again, that goes to the whole, the class and the politics of respectability and all that. But
does the name Vernon Jordan mean anything to you?
It does, right. Urban League.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Vernon and I were during his lifetime very good friends.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And I said to him one time, I said, "Now, Vernon, if you want to get your dose of the Holy Spirit, you have to come to St. John's Lafayette Square, which is my parish."
Okay.
And,
nice.
And he said, "Huh." He said, "The Holy Spirit knocked on the door and y'all don't let him in."
That's great. That's great.
um, how did the people of St. Philip's regard what happened in, first of all, in the church in general, around in the country, but
Mhm.
certainly at St. Philip's, and its not precipitous decline, but certainly its decline
Mhm.
in prominence.
I think there was a lot of looking back, even when I was there, at the very beginning of when I was there. Um, I think certainly people were looking back and they were saying it used to be this wonderful thing where the pews were filled on Sundays that weren't high holy days, and it wasn't just Christmas Eve and Easter where you'd have to, fight to get a seat. That's that sort of thing. And I think there was a very backward looking attitude, and talking about the wonders of Father Mitchell's respect for the liturgy, or Father Went's beautiful voice, or and the fact that he would sing everything, or honestly even Mother Phoebe's adherence to sort of more high church rather than broad church, or I guess the variations I'll say, because I would say she's broad church, but um, definitely sort of a nostalgic view that a lot of the members have.
Mhm.
And then I think also as the church, like the larger Episcopal Church, changes and becomes more inclusive, and on both sort of the political side, but also on the spiritual side, I think that St. Philip's has still stayed pretty conservative in the larger realm of the church. To be a parish that fought relatively behind the scenes, but hard for civil rights. I don't ever remember being in the pews and hearing anything about LGBT rights. Right, it was happening in the church, in the Episcopal Church, but I think there was the attitude of, and I'm not sure if this has changed even since I've been there.
It's Richmond.
Right, exactly, right. But St. Paul's in Richmond, certainly they can have they could have a gay priest, or
Mhm.
St. James might have one or two. Well, actually, maybe not St. James. St. Mark's on Boulevard certainly has a large LGBT population, but I think St. Philip's sort of had the attitude of, well, it's not here, so we don't have to think about it. We won't focus on it. We'll move on. Same thing with I think with the ordination of women, and then having two women as priests in a row. I think that at first, I know that there was some pushback. Mother Phoebe tells me a story that there was a parishioner who I believe is still alive, and I think I know who it was. She didn't say exactly who it was, but she said, I went and he called me Father Phoebe. He said, I don't know what to call you. He said, should I call you Father Phoebe? And she said, Mother or Reverend Ruth is perfectly fine. And then, of course, Reverend Marlene told a story, even as she started in the 2020s. And a male parishioner was in the hospital and he wanted a real priest to come and pray for him, which again is so. And again, I would say that St. Philip's people are among the nicest that I know, but also they're, every bunch has its stalwarts of sort of an antiquated way of thinking.
Yeah,
Um,
but it's not only Black Episcopalians, it's Black
Certainly.
Richmond. It's Black
Well,
Richmond.
that too. Hmm.
Particularly Black middle class Richmond.
So true.
The um, I remember I was away at school, practicing or in law school or whatever it was. How remarkable it was when Artiel and Sherrod called me on the phone and told me that, oh my God, we have a woman on the vestry.
Right. Yeah.
It was remarkable at the time.
I guess Anna Washington, right? I think she was the first woman.
Mhm.
So yeah, it is amazing. And even honestly, I think in comparison to my Baptist upbringing, still St. Philip's was somewhat liberal. So it was
Yeah.
funny sitting under a woman priest for two different women who were priests, and not thinking anything of it after the first two or three times, only because it was different, not because they did anything differently. Um, but as a child growing up in the Baptist church, again, the deacons were all men, and they sat on the front row. The deaconesses were behind them, and a pastor, a reverend, Mister somebody, was in the pulpit. So I actually found that when I came back from school and would go to church with my parents because we were still at my old childhood church at the time.
Yes. Yeah.
I remember just feeling like, wow, this place is awfully sexist in comparison to the place where I worship on a weekly basis, and yet we're still more conservative than the St. Mark's and the St. Paul's of Richmond.
Mm-hmm.
So
I don't know. St. Paul's of Richmond did a wonderful history.
mm-hmm. I read it. Mm-hmm.
Race history, faith,
mm-hmm.
race, and the lost cause. I think it's called.
It was good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was very good. I did an oral history of Christopher Allen Graham, who was
nice.
a civil writer. What is next for you?
So I'm actually working on a third book right now. So again, I love writing institutional histories. I'm taking this interview from my club. So I belong to the Racket Club of Philadelphia, where we play a bunch of antiquated racket sports. So I played like court tennis, which is what Henry VIII used to play.
Yeah.
And we have one of 7 courts in the country, that sort of thing. So I'm actually writing a history or rewriting a history of the club. The last one was done in the late 80s. So now is sort of the time to update it. But I decided to go back and again inject some things in it that just were now left in the first history. So even for a majority white institution, I will say that at least the early history did mention the fact that we had a black member before any other club in Philadelphia, which is shockingly later than you'd think. It was 1972.
Yeah.
Another black attorney who actually went to my rival high school. But making sure that I'm.
Which one was your rival high school? Chestnut Hill?
Penn Charter.
Penn Charter.
Mm-hmm. So, but making sure that even in writing this history, that I'm acknowledging some of the class distinctions and the race distinctions and the gender distinctions that actually they need to be said to give better context to our history, especially. And again, not to get political, and I know that the church is not technically political, but on paper at least. But, as there are these campaigns, I'm in Philadelphia right now, and there's campaigns to remove key parts of history, in these colonial sites as we're about to, celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the country. And the fact that the president's house right on Market Street, less than a mile from where I am, they're removing all the information about Washington's enslaved people. And the fact that he would take people across the river because there was a law in Pennsylvania that said that you can't enslave somebody for longer than 6 months. So he'd take them across to New Jersey and bring them back.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we want to get rid of that, I think right now it's so important for historians to keep writing through the lens of contextualizing things and making sure that we're acknowledging the good and we're also talking about the bad and how the bad affected folks, but also how it shows in our leaders too. So I think
go ahead.
It's just intellectually dishonest to talking about George Washington without talking about the fact that he was a slaveholder.
Or Thomas Jefferson. When after George Floyd and the first serious proposals were put forward to get rid of the Monument Avenue statuary. I wrote a piece for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and they published it in its entirety. My argument was they have no place there, but by all means, keep them there to teach about them. After you teach about them, they will begin to lose their luster because everyone will understand how ridiculous it is.
Sure.
To celebrate the defeat.
It's funny that you said that. I didn't realize that you wrote that article because I wrote it back in 2020. I guess it was in the summer of 2020. I also wrote an op-ed for the Times-Dispatch saying to leave the monuments up, but leave them up in color. So I loved and I lived in a museum district when I lived in Richmond. Driving up and down Monument Avenue every day and seeing Robert E. Lee covered in graffiti, I was like, what a beautiful contextualization.
The perfect thing. I said to people, I said, that's what I mean. It spoke more powerfully with all that graffiti than it had ever spoken.
Sure. And now, honestly, I was in Richmond at the beginning of this year and driving down Monument Avenue, and there's this terrible, now it's just inconvenient to drive around Lee Circle, and there's nothing there. And I actually think that it fit better, again, like you said, covered in graffiti, so that you could walk by and say, oh, this is what was. And honestly, it's almost high art at this point,
Yeah.
despite the foul language that's all over. And actually, people respond. I got some interest. I'm sure that you did as well when you wrote your piece, but got some crazy responses from people who were saying, "How can you look at the F word every day when you drive down the street?" Where I was thinking to myself, I was like, the Catcher in the Rye of Holden Caulfield says you're going to see that scribbled on anything. So it's not a word that's foreign to anybody.
Yeah.
And what a better place to put it than Robert E. Lee's forehead, you know?
Well, I'll send you
Please,
a
yeah.
copy of that piece I wrote. The does it, do you know the story of Mary Elizabeth Bowser?
I do. And the Bowsers actually also belong to St. Philip's. So I had a chance to talk to Dr. or I guess both of them are doctors. So Dr. and Dr. Bowser.
Yeah.
About
Old man Bowser was still alive when you were there?
No, so his son.
Okay, all right.
But got a chance to get a little bit of insight about, I guess, so the older Dr. Bowser and his role in the parish. But then also, I know that his Rosa Bowser was not a member of St. Philip's, but I guess her children and then their children also were. So it was a nice way to also tell the story of how so many families start as Baptist and then end up Episcopalian. And mine, of course, we boomeranged. So, we started Episcopalian, went Baptist, and then I went back. And it'll be interesting to see if that trend continues over the years. But
yeah, people don't tell the story about how Mary Elizabeth Bowser had gotten her freedom in Pennsylvania, and she went back into slavery to be a spy.
Right.
It's a wonderful story. Those are the kinds of stories that need to be told. And I would love to see that story told in some clever way. Well, we can't do it now, but at the base of a Jefferson Davis statue, for example.
Sure. Oh, totally.
Right.
And I will say it is nice to see. So just this morning, I was riding down 6th Street where the Washington House is. And there's a great, we have a blue marker that is a state funded thing. It's not federal, that talks about the escape of Ona Judge. And actually, Erica Dunbar, who wrote the history on that, is a good friend of mine, and her husband grew up with my mom. But I worked under her in college, thinking that I was going to take the PhD route and do history. But I was pleased to see that even if the federal government takes away, the plaques within the president's house, right across the street, you have a state thing that they can't touch, at least for now. Without some litigation. So I'm glad to see that. We have some semblance of that history. But I would love to see a Bowser monument, near a Jefferson Davis or anything near the Confederate White House, honestly.
It's not too late for you to pursue a PhD in history.
I've been told that before, and believe it or not, actually, so Mr. Temple, I applied for a program when I graduated law school. So I took the bar, I passed the bar, and then said, maybe I still want to do this. Ended up not getting into the program that I wanted, and then came back to Philadelphia. But it's always been in the back of my mind. I'll say that. Because it is what I love. History is truly my passion. I like working in government, and I'm glad that I'm an attorney, even if I don't practice. But
absolutely.
But I still, history comes first in my love.
A law degree is a very useful degree.
Indeed.
And it's also teaches an analytical discipline that's quite fungible. We're coming toward the end now. Listen, I always take this time in the interview to ask, is there anything that you thought you wanted me to ask that I didn't? And is there anything you would like to say that we haven't talked about?
I feel like we've covered a lot of the most interesting areas of St. Philip's history. I think, maybe for the record, talking a little bit just about the pandemic and how St. Philip's has worked through that, and sort of the aftermath of that, maybe.
Yeah, how did that happen?
Sure. So, and I have good firsthand knowledge of this. So I was on the vestry or I was elected to the vestry right as COVID started. And of course, Mother Phoebe was becoming Bishop Phoebe. We had a new priest in charge in Reverend Marlene. And I was so impressed just within the first 4 weeks or so of everything locking down. Immediately, she employed the two, members who were there regularly, who were under 30, me and Tyra Beeman, and said to both of us, "Okay, I need your help. Can you be producers for our Sunday service? We're gonna." And it was a nice way to get out of the house first off, where I was able to leave the house in double mask and not talk to anybody or touch anybody, but was able to be in the physical place of St. Philip's, which was such a treat, given that we couldn't go anywhere. But it was interesting watching the parish adapt to being online, figuring out sort of ways to enhance digital or virtual worship, which I never thought I would ever have to do. So I just remember being very excited when I learned how to produce, a pre-recorded service and add in bells at communion. I was so excited when I found the sound clip. I was like, okay, we're going to have bells again at communion. Like, it was those little things that sort of sustained all of us through.
Well, I'm glad you did that and didn't find a way to put the smells in as well.
I couldn't get the smells right, exactly. But also, unfortunately, during COVID, St. Philip's, I think, in rapid succession, none of them died of COVID either, but lost maybe 5 members who were in their 90s who all had incredible institutional knowledge. So Ruth Little, Russell Menafield, Anna Washington. I'm missing one other person, forgetting who else. But those 3 names alone. You have the first woman who was ever on the vestry. You have the church historian, and then you have a member who had been there, was a vestryman, but also had been there since he was a child.
Ed Van? Was it Ed Van?
Ed Van, I think, had passed before then. Okay. I think. I might be wrong on that. But I'm forgetting. There were a few other folks who it's like they died in rapid succession. And it was a shame that COVID sort of took their last few months, both for their own sake, but also that the parish. I never got the chance to really interview any of them to talk about, other than in passing in the years before. Never got to have a formal interview with them to discuss their time in St. Philip's. But I think since we've come out of COVID, so whenever I go to Richmond, I sit on the alumni board for the university. So I get to go down two times a year, and I always make sure to visit St. Philip's. And of course, the people don't change, and the kindness of the community doesn't change. But I do think that the parish has changed from a very high church place, or I'll say a relatively high church place when I started there, to a broad church that is definitely more comfortable reaching out to a very changing north side, which is becoming increasingly more white, and trying to engage with those families, but also still trying to retain its Black identity. Watching the parish still be pretty sustainable, but also work and push back on the diocese as we move away from George Floyd. So I think in 2020, it was very easy for the rest of the diocese to be like, we have to talk to St. Philip's because we need to make this right. And now, unfortunately, I think we're back to that point where we're somewhat of an afterthought again. And I respected Reverend Marlene's leadership in being very direct and saying, we're going to give less as a pledge this year because they don't care the way that we want them to care. Whereas old St. Philip's people would have never have done that. They would have paid their pledge and said, we're going to pay the same as everybody else so that we can be a part of the church, where I think there's sort of a more radical is not the right word, but as radical as an Episcopalian can be. I think that the church has gotten a little more radical, but in a good trouble sort of a way, not in a disruptive way. And again, I would say that I'm liturgically conservative in that I shudder whenever I hear them thinking about creating a new rite. But at the same time, because that's why I'm Episcopalian. I'm not Baptist anymore because I like the structure and the these and thous and all that, right? I'm fine with sort of progressive politics, but I'm not good with the changing and also just Christocentric nature of the church as well, where it's Christ comes first, and we're not deists. We're Christians, period.
Right.
And I think that St. Philip's does do a good job of ensuring that Christ is still proclaimed every Sunday rather than sort of a nice spiritual
Do they use Rite 2?
They do. So Rite 1 is at the 8 o'clock service, and then Rite 2 is at the main 10:30 service.
I prefer Rite 1. I've always preferred Rite 1.
Hmm.
During the days of AIDS,
Mm-hmm.
I was very active in the AIDS community.
Okay.
I chaired the board of the Whitman Walker Clinic, which was perhaps the most prominent AIDS service organization on the East Coast. I'm proud to say.
Nice.
There was, when the altar, the Eucharistic table was against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And the rubric in the prayer book would direct the priest to turn and face the people and recite the comfortable words. Come unto me, all who travail and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So important that the priest turned to face the people to say words of comfort.
Mm-hmm.
It was important in the days of AIDS because all meant all.
Mm-hmm.
Did not have an asterisk. And I frankly abhor the form of the confession in Rite 2.
Really? Okay.
We need to go back to manifold sins and wickedness, which we from time to time most grievously have committed by thought, word, and deed against thy divine majesty.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Sure, certainly. I love the fact that whenever I go to St. Thomas in Philadelphia, we still say the prayer of humble access, which we don't do anymore at St. Philip's. So I think that
I'm not worthy so much as to gather up the crumbs on
the crumbs from the table, right? Yeah. But thou art the same, Lord, right? So like that sort of language, I think it's important that we're not getting too what's the right word? We're not too full of ourselves where we're, not thinking that we're too holy because we're not,
No, we're not.
Much better to acknowledge manifold sins.
And wickedness.
And wickedness, right?
Wickedness. There was a member of St. Philip's, you have her picture in here, Mrs. Rutherford B. Sampson.
Okay.
And, she would come in with her lorgnette and her fox fur pieces and suit. And it was like she was there on the prow of a ship.
Okay.
And I kept thinking when she would walk down the aisle, she'd always go to the front.
Of course, right.
I'd say, I wonder what wickedness she got into this past week.
That's funny. That is funny. I was going to say, he or she who sits in the front row and walks, the longest up the aisle usually has some things to tell. So.
Oh, yes, she does. And she did.
That's funny.
And she did.
That is funny.
Now, we're going to close now. Do you have any questions for me?
Actually, I think probably when the next thing that I read about St. Philip's, I never actually interviewed you completely for this, and I think that you have a really important perspective of the parish, having grown up at St. Philip's, but also working in diocesan circles and at VTS, and just adding to the stories of Black Episcopalian lawyers who also, went to seminary. I think that I probably need to interview you at some point, in all seriousness. So,
okay, I'd be happy to do that. You should come to the seminary at some time.
I'd like to. I've never been. So,
on the 30th of September, we're having a day of commemoration of the 100th birthday of the late Bishop John Thomas Walker.
Okay, nice.
Who was the first Black bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Who also desegregated the Virginia Theological Seminary.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yes,
okay.
The first Black priest who didn't have to go to
Bishop Payne
Divinity School.
Funny enough, I was at, speaking of Bishop Walker, so I have a good friend who's a member of the Metropolitan Club in DC.
Yeah.
And we play squash against each other whenever we see each other. So I was invited to play him there. And he mentioned Bishop Walker, and he said Bishop Walker was our first Black member. So, excuse me. So it's funny that his name, he just broke a lot of barriers. And again,
All
it's a
the
shame
time.
that somebody as recent as him broke all those barriers. So, but yet I'm glad that he did, but still.
You know, people want to say that this is all ancient history.
Mm-hmm. So true.
There are people still alive. I'm at the, you know, the last line of people who have a lived history
Sure.
of segregation and what that meant.
It is incredible how people don't realize how, you know, how close it, and I guess even the fact that my dad always says this, where he was born in 64, and he says, you know, in my lifetime there were people in, and he grew up in Indiana, and he said in my lifetime, still even in 1964 where I was born, you know, it was not uncommon for a white hospital to turn away a Black child if they needed care, you know. And he's like, that's my life. And he's like, and I'm not that. He's like, he's over 60 now, but he said, I'm not that old, you know, and yet still this was my life. And, or he said he attended the University of Indiana at Bloomington. And he said, when you drive from Indianapolis to Bloomington, you have to pass through Martinsville.
Yeah.
And Black people did not get off the bus at Martinsville, and still don't get off the bus in Martinsville because it was a sundown town. So, you know, and same thing in Philadelphia, even, where certain neighborhoods, you still don't necessarily, you can go there, but nobody lives there, you know, and it could be, you know, working neighborhoods or wealthy neighborhoods, either or.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, let's shut down now, and I'm going to take this and send it off to the transcription service.
Sounds good.
And get that all back to you. And I want you to make me a promise. Rittenhouse Grill.
Rittenhouse Grill. And what is your friend's name?
Garth.
Garth
Weldon.
Garth Weldon. Okay. I mean, I'm writing this down just so that I don't forget.
Good.
Garth Weldon.
Ask for him when you get there.
Will do. Okay. I'll go soon for a meal. Garth Weldon. All right. Got it.
All right.
It was great to see you, and thank you again for interviewing me.
Well, thank you, Ken.
Cool.
This is not the end of our association. I can guarantee you that.
Oh, certainly.
Right.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Take care now.
So, thanks again. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.